After an argument during camping, my son left me in the middle of the cold taiga. He thought I would never return. But he was wrong. When he arrived home, I was waiting for him, and I wasn't alone. Son, meet my friends. Betrayal has a price. Revenge has a voice. What follows is a justice he did not expect. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The brochures hit my desk like accusations. Glossy photographs of split-level homes with mountain views, financial projections printed on expensive paper, numbers highlighted in yellow that promised returns I knew would never materialize. James spread them across my ledger with the practiced enthusiasm of a salesman closing a deal he'd already celebrated in his mind. Dad, this is exactly what Jennifer and I need. His voice carried that rehearsed confidence I'd heard before, the franchise opportunity, the consulting venture, the online business that required just a small investment to generate passive income. The market's perfect right now, and this property will triple in value within 5 years. I just need $50,000 to secure it. $50,000? I removed my reading glasses slowly, setting them beside the calculator I'd been using before he arrived unannounced. Outside my office window, Anchorage moved through its Thursday afternoon rhythm, traffic crawling toward Eagle River, mountains shadowed against July sky. Inside, my son waited for me to become the solution to problems he'd created himself. You said something similar about that franchise opportunity 2 years ago? I kept my voice measured, professional, the tone I used with clients who couldn't balance their books. I lent you $8,000 then. That money never came back, James. Neither did the explanation you promised. His jaw tightened. The enthusiasm drained from his face like water through cheap fabric, replaced by something harder. He leaned back in the chair, arms crossing defensively across his chest. The glossy brochures suddenly seemed irrelevant between us. That was different. The franchise had unexpected costs. Everything has unexpected costs. I pulled open my desk drawer, removed the ledger I kept for personal accounts. My fingers found the page without looking. 2 years of documentation, promises recorded in my own handwriting, dates when repayment was supposed to begin. You told me 6 months. Then it became a year. Then you stopped returning calls about it entirely. James stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor, loud enough to make me wince. He gathered the brochures with sharp, angry movements, shoving them into the leather folder he'd carried in like a shield. You're sitting on hundreds of thousands while your son struggles. The accusation came out bitter, practiced. Jennifer works herself exhausted trying to make our house presentable. Her friends' parents help them. Real families support each other. Real families. The phrase hung between us like smoke. I thought about Sarah, gone 5 years now. Who would have known exactly what to say to bridge this gap? Who would have found the balance between support and enabling that I couldn't seem to locate anymore? You know what her father did? James pressed forward, voice rising. He gave them $30,000 for their down payment. $30,000. Without hesitation. Without lectures about responsibility. That's what real support looks like. Real responsibility means honoring your commitments. I stood to meet him at eye level, though at 62 my back protested the sudden movement. I'm not a bank, James. I'm not an ATM machine, and I won't fund your lifestyle choices when you can't manage what you already have. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Outside, someone honked their horn. A phone rang in the outer office where my assistant had already left for the day. James stared at me with an expression I couldn't read, something beyond anger, beyond frustration, something cold and calculated that made my stomach tighten. You're going to regret this, Dad. His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, which somehow made it worse than shouting. You won't always be the one controlling everything. Things change. People change. He turned and walked out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the framed CPA certificates on my wall. 30 years of professional credentials that suddenly felt meaningless. I stood there listening to his footsteps recede down the hallway, then the outer door closing, then the silence that felt heavier than any argument. I sat down slowly. My desk looked exactly as it had 15 minutes ago, calculator, ledger, client files waiting for my attention, but something fundamental had shifted. I reached for the photograph I kept beside my computer monitor. A camping trip from when James was 16. Father and son standing on a ridge near Denali, mountains stretching behind us, both of us grinning at the camera Sarah had held. James's smile in that photograph was genuine, uncomplicated by money or resentment or whatever had turned him into the man who just threatened me in my own office. I studied that younger face for a long time, trying to find where I'd lost him. Things change. People change. His words circled my thoughts like vultures. The drive home felt longer than usual. Traffic moved with its typical sluggish persistence, brake lights flaring red in the lowering sun, but my mind stayed trapped in that office confrontation. James's final words kept echoing. "You're going to regret this." Not a prediction, a promise. I parked in my driveway but didn't get out immediately. The house waited, small, practical, purchased 30 years ago when Sarah and I were starting out. The mortgage had been paid off for a decade. No debt, no financial leverage over my decisions. That independence had always felt like security. Tonight, it felt like isolation. Inside, the silence pressed against my ears. I dropped my briefcase by the door, moved through rooms that had felt emptier since Sarah's death. The hallway displayed our history in photographs. James as a toddler, as a Little League player, as a teenager holding up a massive salmon he'd caught on the Kenai River. Somewhere between those images and today, something had fractured. I made coffee I didn't want, scrambled eggs I barely tasted. Thursday evening bled into Friday morning. Work provided structure. Clients who needed tax advice, businesses requiring quarterly reviews. But I found myself checking my phone repeatedly, half expecting James to call with more accusations. The screen stayed dark. Friday evening, I went to the garage. My camping equipment hung on pegboard hooks, organized with the same precision I applied to accounting. I tested my water filter, checked my GPS unit, reviewed maps of Alaska's backcountry. These were habits from younger years, when Sarah and I would disappear into wilderness every summer. When James would beg to come along, eager to learn fire starting and navigation and which berries were safe to eat. Maybe I was too rigid. The thought arrived uninvited while I inspected my first aid kit. Maybe Jennifer really did push him to ask, and he felt cornered between his wife's expectations and his father's judgment. But $8,000, still unpaid after 2 years of promises, that wasn't about being strict. That was about pattern, about character. Saturday passed in a blur of yard work and grocery shopping and trying not to think about my son's cold stare. Sunday arrived with the weight of unfinished business. I prepared a simple dinner, chicken breast, steamed broccoli, the bachelor meals that had become routine. The knife was moving through a bell pepper when my phone rang. James's name appeared on the caller ID. My stomach tightened. I set down the knife, wiped my hands on a towel, let it ring twice more before answering. "Dad." His voice sounded completely different, warm, almost vulnerable. "I've been thinking all weekend." I was out of line Thursday, way out of line. I said nothing, waiting. I let Jennifer's pressure get to me, let my own frustration control my words. "I'm sorry. I want to make this right." The apology landed like something fragile between us. I leaned against the counter, phone pressed to my ear, trying to reconcile this tone with Thursday's threats. "Remember those camping trips we took near Denali when I was 15? James continued. "Those were the best times, Dad. Just you and me, no distractions. What if we did that again? A week, just us, reconnecting. I need that. I think we both do." Denali, the word triggered memories, ridgelines and caribou migrations, and teaching James to read topographical maps by firelight, before money became the language between us, before Jennifer in debt and disappointed expectations. "Denali's a long drive, James, 5 hours each way." I kept my voice cautious, testing the sincerity I wanted to believe. "The Chugach Mountains are an hour away, good trails, good camping. Why go so far?" "Because Denali meant something, Dad." His response came quick, earnest. "That's where we were closest. That's where I need us to be again." I stood in my kitchen, staring at the half-prepared dinner, the phone warm against my ear. Part of me heard warning bells. Part of me remembered that photograph on my desk, the genuine smile, the uncomplicated joy. Part of me was just tired of being alone. When were you thinking? Mid-July. Gives us time to prepare, coordinate schedules. 10 days from now? 10 days. Enough time to clear my calendar, check equipment, talk myself out of suspicion. Enough time to choose hope over cynicism. All right, I heard myself say. Let's do it. After we hung up, I stood holding the silent phone, staring at it with mixed emotions warring inside my chest. James sounded genuine. The apology felt real, but something underneath nagged at me, some instinct I couldn't name. I looked at the bell pepper on my cutting board, half-sliced and waiting. Then I looked at my phone again. Maybe sons deserved second chances. Maybe fathers who refused second chances weren't fathers anymore. I wanted to believe that. I chose to believe that. I set down the phone and returned to making dinner, allowing myself something I hadn't felt in 3 days. A small, cautious smile at the possibility of reconciliation. Monday morning arrived with overcast skies and the promise of rain that wouldn't materialize. I drove to the coffee shop James had suggested, a place downtown with exposed brick and industrial lighting, the kind of establishment that served lattes with foam art. He was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table with trail maps spread out like battle plans. Dad, he stood, smile, gestured to the chair across from him. Got you a black coffee. No sugar, right? The gesture felt calculated, but I accepted it anyway. I sat down, pulling my own topographical map from my jacket pocket. The Chugach Range, familiar terrain I'd hiked dozens of times. James, the Chugach is solid wilderness. I unfolded my map, smoothing it across the table. Eagle River Valley has everything we need. Streams, wildlife, privacy. We could leave Friday morning, be camping by lunch. Why drive 5 hours when we have good terrain an hour away? He leaned forward. His hands came together, fingers interlaced, elbows resting on the table. The body language of earnest confession. Dad, it's not about convenience. His voice carried weight I wanted to believe was genuine. Denali is where you taught me to really see Alaska. Remember that ridge where we watched the caribou migration? That's where I felt closest to you. That's what I need now. That's what we need. The Caribou Ridge. I remembered it. James, at 15, binoculars pressed to his face, counting animals as they flowed across the valley, like a river of brown and white. He'd been so focused, so present, before phones and debt and Jennifer's expensive expectations. I studied his face, looking for deception, finding only what appeared to be vulnerability. Here's what makes sense. We take my truck. James pushed my Chugach map aside, spreading his Denali maps in its place. It's newer, better clearance, more reliable, and my camping gear's all upgraded. Modern tent, water filtration system, emergency supplies. Why duplicate everything when mine covers us both? The logic seemed sound, practical even, but something underneath bothered me, not enough to voice, just enough to notice. Your equipment's reliable? I kept my tone neutral. You've tested the water filter, the stove. We'll be remote, James. The areas near Denali aren't like state parks. Cell coverage disappears. We need functional gear. Dad, trust me, huh? He maintained eye contact, unwavering. I've used this setup a dozen times. Everything works perfectly. Trust me. 2 words that shouldn't require saying. We spent another hour discussing routes, supplies, timeline. Mid-July departure. 10 days away. Enough time to clear my client schedule, prepare properly. James took notes in a leather-bound planner, listing items with organizational precision I hadn't seen from him before. Maybe he was changing. Maybe responsibility was finally taking root. The following days passed in routine rhythm, clients needing tax advice, quarterly reports requiring attention, the steady pulse of work that gave structure to solitary life. But evenings found me in the garage, reviewing skills I hadn't used in years. I practiced starting fires with flint and steel, my hands remembering movements before my mind did. I pulled field guides from shelves, reviewing edible plant identification, fiddlehead ferns, fireweed shoots, the distinctive leaves of wild celery. James sent texts, packing lists, recommendations. Keep it light, Dad. Minimal redundancy. We don't want to haul unnecessary weight 2 miles to camp. I stood in my garage the night before departure, holding my GPS tracker. The device fit comfortably in my palm, familiar weight, proven reliability. My thumb hovered over the power button. I could turn it on, slip it into my pack, have navigation backup regardless of James's assurances, but that would be choosing suspicion over trust, cynicism over hope. I placed it back on the shelf. My satellite phone sat beside it, bulky, outdated, but functional. Emergency communication that had saved me once when Sarah twisted her ankle 3 days into a Kenai Peninsula hike. I reached for it, hesitated, withdrew my hand. James said his gear covered us both. Sons trying to reconcile with fathers shouldn't face automatic doubt. I packed what he'd specified. Lightweight clothing, minimal toiletries, basic first aid supplies. My pack felt incomplete without the safety equipment I normally carried, but reconciliation required compromise. Trust required risk. That night, I loaded everything into my truck's passenger seat, ready for the early morning drive to James's house. I paused at my front door, looking back through the hallway toward the garage where my GPS and phone remained on their shelf. Something felt slightly wrong. Not wrong enough to cancel, not wrong enough to justify suspicion, just wrong enough to notice. But sons deserved second chances. Fathers who refused second chances weren't fathers anymore. I locked the door and went to bed, setting my alarm for 5:30. Tomorrow, Denali. Tomorrow, reconciliation. Tomorrow, I'd learn what my son had really planned. Dawn came cold and clear. I arrived at James's house just after 6, the sun barely clearing the Chugach Peaks behind Anchorage. His Ford F-150 sat in the driveway, newer model, dark blue paint reflecting morning light. He emerged from his garage carrying 2 large packs and a cooler, his movements efficient and practiced. Perfect timing! He loaded gear into the truck bed with quick precision. We'll miss the worst traffic heading north. I transferred my pack from my truck to his. The bed contained more equipment than I'd expected. Tent, cooking supplies, what looked like a comprehensive emergency kit. Maybe my concerns about his preparedness had been unfounded. The George Parks Highway unrolled before us, stretching north toward mountains that grew larger with each mile. James drove with relaxed confidence, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally gesturing as he talked about work. The development company landed this massive contract last month, luxury condos overlooking the inlet. His enthusiasm seemed genuine, unforced. My commission structure means if I close 3 units, I'm looking at serious money. Real money, Dad. The kind that changes things. I noted the emphasis on money but let it pass. He wasn't asking for anything, just sharing. That was progress. We stopped for breakfast in Wasilla at a diner with red vinyl booths and waitresses who called everyone Hon. James ordered the lumberjack special, ate with appetite while discussing the condo project's architectural features. No mention of Thursday's confrontation. No reference to the $50,000 he'd demanded. The omission felt deliberate, strategic, but I chose to interpret it as maturity. Past Talkeetna, civilization thinned to scattered homesteads, and then nothing but wilderness. Spruce forest pressed close to the highway, mountains looming white and massive in the distance. James's phone lost signal gradually, bars disappearing one by one until the screen showed only emergency calls available. There it is. James pointed to a turnoff barely visible through the trees. Our access point. We parked at a trailhead marked only by a weathered wooden post. No other vehicles. No signs of recent use. The isolation felt total, complete. Exactly what I'd once loved about Alaska backcountry. Today it felt different, heavier. The hike-in took 90 minutes. 2 miles through dense spruce taiga, following a trail that required experience to track. James navigated confidently, checking his phone's GPS while signal ghost images still functioned. We emerged at a clearing beside a stream that ran clear and cold over rounded stones. This is perfect. I dropped my pack, surveying the site. Level ground, water access, natural windbreak from surrounding trees. Same basic area we camped when you were 15. Same area, James confirmed. Different spot. That old site's overgrown now. We set up camp with coordinated efficiency. I drove tent stakes while he strung the bear bag line between 2 sturdy spruce. The movements felt comfortable, familiar, like muscle memory from decades of outdoor experience finally finding common ground again. That first evening passed almost peacefully. We cooked over the campfire, freeze-dried meals reconstituted with stream water, James filtered through his modern pump system. He told stories about difficult clients at the development company, Jennifer's book club drama, ordinary life details that felt like bridges being rebuilt. This was a good idea, James. The words came easier than I'd expected. Being out here, away from everything, it reminds me why Alaska matters. Why this kind of quiet matters. I'm glad we came. Me too, Dad. He poked the fire with a long stick, sending sparks spiraling into darkness. I forgot how much I needed this. Needed us. The second day, we hiked deeper into the taiga. Ridge lines opened spectacular views, mountain ranges stretching to horizons, valleys carved by ancient glaciers, the scope of wilderness that made human concerns feel appropriately small. James photographed everything with his phone, still catching occasional signal bars at higher elevations. I identified edible plants by habit, young fireweed shoots, cow parsnip stems, skills returning automatically. But that evening the mask slipped. We'd finished dinner, settled beside the fire as darkness closed in. James had been quiet during the meal, his earlier enthusiasm fading into something harder. Then he spoke, voice carrying edge I recognized from Thursday's office confrontation. You know what Jennifer said last week. He didn't look at me, just stared into flames. She said her father gave them $30,000 for their down payment. $30,000. Without hesitation. That's what real support looks like. That's what family does. The temperature between us dropped like a stone through ice. Jennifer's father also isn't still waiting for $8,000 his son borrowed and never repaid. I kept my voice level, controlled. Real support isn't throwing money at people who won't take responsibility. I taught you better than this, James. Or I tried to. He stopped mid-breath, went completely still. Then he stood abruptly, his face shadowed and unreadable in the firelight. He stared at me, not with anger exactly, but with something cold and calculated that made my stomach tighten. Yeah. His voice came flat, distant. You tried. Long pause. Fire crackling. Wind moving through spruce branches overhead. I'm tired. We'll talk in the morning. He walked to his tent without looking back, zipper closing with sharp finality. I sat alone beside the dying fire, watching sparks rise toward stars barely visible through cloud cover, moving in from the west. The reconciliation was a facade. I understood that now, but I didn't yet understand what it meant. I should have. When I woke the next morning, something was wrong. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was empty. James should have been up already, rebuilding the fire, boiling water for coffee. The absence of sound felt deliberate. I unzipped my tent slowly. Dawn light filtered through spruce branches at an angle that told me it was later than usual, past 7, maybe closer to 8. I stepped out barefoot onto cold ground that made me wince. James's tent was gone, not collapsed, not packed carelessly, gone completely, as if it had never existed. Only flattened grass remained where it had stood 20 feet from mine. The fire pit held nothing but cold ashes from last night. No fresh kindling, no signs of morning activity. I walked the perimeter of our camp, my chest tightening with each detail I registered. The area where James had stored his gear showed only crushed vegetation. Every trace of his presence had been systematically removed. I turned toward my backpack, still leaning against the log where I'd left it. Something about its position looked wrong, slightly tipped, the main flap not quite closed the way I'd secured it. I dropped to my knees beside it. My hands moved through pockets and compartments with increasing urgency. GPS navigator, gone. Satellite phone, gone. Lighter, gone. Trail map, gone. Most of the food supplies we'd been sharing, gone. What remained felt like mockery. My sleeping bag, 2 protein bars, a half-liter water bottle, the small knife I'd brought, basic toiletries, including a tiny sewing kit. On a flat rock beside the cold fire pit sat a folded piece of paper, weighted down by a stone. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The handwriting was James's, neat, unhurried, the script of someone who'd taken his time composing his message. I read it aloud to the empty forest, my voice flat with shock. You always said the taiga teaches survival. Time to remember those lessons. Maybe then you'll understand what's more important, money or family. If you return, we'll talk differently. James. If I return, I read it again, then a third time, the patronizing tone. the self-justification, the conditional phrasing that acknowledged I might not survive. He planned this. Every smile during the drive north, every warm story by the campfire, even last night's argument, testing me one final time. When I refused again, when I wouldn't give him what he demanded, he made his choice. My son chose to leave me here to die, over $50,000. I crumpled the note in my fist, rage flooding through me so intensely that black spots danced at the edges of my vision. Then I forced myself to smooth it out, fold it carefully, place it in my pocket. Evidence, even if only for myself. I walked toward the trailhead direction, 2 miles through dense forest. I couldn't see the parking area from camp, but I knew with absolute certainty that the truck was gone. The silence confirmed it. The isolation was total. 50 miles, maybe more. Between here and the Parks Highway, the main road that could take me back to civilization. 50 miles of wilderness, with no navigation equipment, no communication devices, no fire starter, minimal food, and water that would last perhaps one day if I stretched it impossibly thin. The temperature would drop to 40 degrees tonight, lower in another week. I had a sleeping bag rated for 50 degrees, and a knife the length of my palm. I walked back to camp and forced myself to sit on a log, controlled my breathing. Shock wouldn't save me. Rage wouldn't save me. Only clear thinking would keep me alive. James thought I was just an accountant who took camping trips. Comfortable, soft, someone whose wilderness skills were decorative rather than functional. He forgot where I learned those skills. 30 years of Alaska backcountry before he was born. Before Sarah. Before mortgages and clients and comfortable suburban life had made those abilities unnecessary. He forgot that I taught him everything he knew about survival, which meant I knew more, which meant I'd held back, which meant he'd underestimated me completely. I stood, retrieved the water bottle, took a single measured sip, 1 capful, no more, then replaced the cap with deliberate care. That careful conservation marked something shifting inside me, from victim to strategist, from shock to calculation. James made a mistake leaving me alive. He made a bigger mistake underestimating what I could do when survival became the only option. If I die out here, he inherits everything anyway. My business, my savings, my house, everything. But I wasn't going to die. I was going home. And when I got there, my son was going to learn what happens when you try to murder your father over money. South. The Parks Highway ran south of here. 50 miles. Maybe less, maybe more. 3 days if I moved smart. 4 if I was weak. 5 if I made mistakes. I wouldn't make mistakes. First problem, navigation. I pulled my toiletry kit from the backpack, soap, razor, tiny scissors, and there, overlooked by James in his systematic looting, a single sewing needle barely an inch long. I sat by the stream. The knife blade became a magnetizer, stroking the needle repeatedly in one direction. Friction and ferrous metal. Physics I'd learned 40 years ago and never forgotten. 20 minutes of patient repetition. I filled the bottle cap with water, floated the magnetized needle carefully on the surface, watched it slowly align itself north-south, wobbling before settling. I scratched an arrow on the cap's edge marking south. Crude, imprecise, but functional. I shouldered my pack and began walking. The first day stretched into eternity. Dense spruce forest where sight lines extended maybe 30 yards. Uneven ground studded with roots and hidden beneath moss. I checked my improvised compass every 30 minutes, adjusted course, kept moving. 1 capful of water every 2 hours, precisely measured despite the thirst that became a constant scream by afternoon. 15 miles, that was the goal. 15 miles before darkness forced me to stop. The first night nearly killed me. I built a lean-to from fallen branches and evergreen boughs. Work my hands remembered even as my brain struggled with exhaustion. Crawled into my sleeping bag wearing every layer of clothing. The temperature dropped. 40 degrees, maybe lower. The bag was rated for 50. I ate 1 protein bar with agonizing slowness, making each bite last, letting it dissolve on my tongue. 400 calories to fuel a body that had burned thousands. Hypothermia crept in through inadequate insulation. I forced myself to shiver actively, generating heat, fighting the dangerous lethargy that whispered I should just rest. Just sleep. Just stop struggling. I thought about James, warm in his house, sleeping beside Jennifer, believing his father was dying in the wilderness he'd been abandoned in. That rage kept me warm enough to survive. Dawn came eventually. Everything hurt. I forced myself up, forced myself to move, because stopping meant dying. The second day brought small mercies, wild blueberries growing in a clearing where sunlight penetrated its canopy. Alaska's brief summer had ripened them perfectly. I ate carefully. Too many would cause stomach problems I couldn't afford, but the sugar provided energy that the protein bars couldn't match. Afternoon brought me to a stream, shallow sections where water moved quickly over stones. I waded in barefoot, the cold shocking away exhaustion momentarily. Hand fishing. I'd learned it in my 20s from an Athabascan guide on the Copper River. Stand motionless. Let the fish forget you exist. Then quick hands, trapping them against submerged rocks. 3 attempts over an hour. 2 successful catches. Small grayling, maybe 6 inches each. I hesitated only briefly before eating them raw. Protein. Essential calories. The texture made my stomach lurch, but I forced them down. The second night passed slightly better. I knew what to expect. Knew how to manage the cold. Knew that morning would come if I just endured. The third morning I stumbled onto a dirt road. I dropped to my knees in overwhelming relief. The first emotional break since reading James's note. Allowed myself 2 minutes of closed-eye breathing, then stood. The road was primitive. 2 ruts with grass growing between. Rarely used, but roads led somewhere. Roads meant people, eventually. I walked down its center, making myself visible. An hour later, I heard an engine. The pickup truck that appeared around the bend was old but well-maintained. Dark green paint faded by weather. It slowed as it approached, pulling to a stop 20 feet away. The driver climbed out, man in his late 60s, weathered face suggesting decades of outdoor work, practical clothing worn with the comfort of long familiarity. "You all right there?" Concern evident in his tone. "You look like you've had a rough time. How long you been out here?" I straightened despite exhaustion, accepting the water bottle he offered, but drinking slowly, controlled. 3 days. I kept my voice steady, crafting the story even as fatigue pulled at my thoughts. Got separated from my camping group near Denali. Navigation equipment failed. Had to walk out. "You headed toward Anchorage?" "Thomas Miller." He extended his hand. "Former park ranger. Yeah, I'm heading back from a hunting trip. Climb in." The truck's passenger seat felt impossibly comfortable. Thomas didn't press immediately, just drove, letting me collect myself. 3 days? He said eventually. "That's serious country back there. You're lucky. Most people panic, make bad choices. You kept your head." "Old habits." I accepted the credit while deflecting attention. "I've done Alaska wilderness before. Just never planned on testing those skills quite so thoroughly." We drove in companionable silence for a while. Then I asked the question that had been forming since I'd found James's note. "Question for you, Thomas. You worked for the Park Service. What happens legally if someone abandons a person in wilderness? Hypothetically. Just curious about Alaska law after this experience." He glanced at me, reading between lines with the skill of someone who'd spent decades dealing with tourists and their half-told stories. "Depends on intent. Accidental separation? Nothing. Deliberate endangerment." He paused. "That's Alaska statute, 1141-130. Reckless endangerment. Hard to prove, though. You'd need evidence of intent." I had evidence. A note in my pocket, written in my son's handwriting. The 5-hour drive gave me time to think, to plan, to understand what came next. James thought I died out there, thought he was inheriting everything, my business, my savings, my house. Thought he'd won. He didn't know I was alive, didn't know I was coming home, and he definitely didn't know what happened next. Thomas dropped me at my house around 2 in the afternoon. We exchanged phone numbers in his truck's cab, mutual respect passing between us without need for elaboration. "Take care of yourself, DeWitt." He gripped my hand firmly. "You survived something most people wouldn't. That means something." "It does," I agreed. "Thank you, Thomas." I stood in my driveway, watching his truck disappear around the corner, key in my hand, looking at my home with different eyes. 4 days ago, I'd locked that door, believing I was going camping with my son. Now I understood what my son had actually planned. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Mail scattered on the floor beneath the slot. Dishes from my last breakfast still in the sink. The normalcy felt surreal after 3 nights sleeping on frozen ground, rationing water, wondering if I'd die alone in wilderness. I showered methodically, scrubbing away grime and sweat and the physical evidence of survival. Changed into clean clothes, khakis, button-down shirt, the uniform of accountants and businessmen. Looking in the mirror, I saw someone who appeared unchanged, but my eyes were harder than they'd been 4 days ago. The Anchorage Police Department occupied a municipal building downtown, concrete and glass, and the institutional architecture of bureaucracy. I entered through the main doors at 3 o'clock, approached the desk sergeant, stated my business calmly. I need to file an incident report. Wilderness emergency. Resolved. Officer Craig Anderson met me in a standard interview room. Table, chairs, recording equipment on the wall. Mid-40s. Experienced enough to read between lines. Professional enough to let me tell it my way. Mr. Gibson, he opened a notepad. You said wilderness incident. 4 days ago I went camping near Denali with my son James. We became separated. My navigation equipment failed. I walked out. 50 miles over 3 days. I'm reporting it now for documentation purposes. I slid James's note across the table without dramatic presentation. Anderson read it slowly, his expression not changing, but something shifting behind his eyes. Mr. Gibson, I'm documenting this as a wilderness incident with safe resolution. But this note, if you return, that phrasing suggests your son expected you might not survive. Are you certain you don't want to pursue charges? I'm certain. My voice stayed level, controlled. I'm reporting facts. What happens next is my decision. He filed the report, gave me an incident number and a copy of the documentation. I folded the papers carefully, placed them in my pocket beside the note I'd carried out of the wilderness. From the parking lot, I called Robert Palmer. We'd known each other professionally for years. I'd handled tax work for some of his estate planning clients. He'd referred business disputes my way. His secretary initially resisted the urgency. Mr. Palmer has appointments until 6? Tell him it's DeWitt Gibson, and it's urgent. Tonight, if possible. Robert came on the line 30 seconds later. DeWitt? What's wrong? I need legal advice. Estate planning, trust work. Can you meet this evening? Something in my voice convinced him. 7 o'clock, my office. Palmer and Associates occupied the 5th floor of a downtown building on 4th Avenue. I took the elevator up at 6:55, entered the reception area, followed Robert into his conference room. He'd set up recording equipment, standard practice for client consultations, and had a legal pad ready. I sat down heavily, allowing exhaustion to show for the first time since Thomas had dropped me off. 4 days ago, my son drove me into remote Denali wilderness, took my navigation equipment, communication devices, and supplies while I slept, and left this note. I placed it on the table between us. He abandoned me 50 miles from the nearest road. I walked out. Robert read the note, read it again, looked up at me with shock replacing his usual professional composure. DeWitt, this is serious. This language, time to remember those lessons, if you return, shows premeditation and acknowledgement of danger. Combined with taking your equipment, this is Alaska Statute 1141.30. Reckless endangerment. Possibly attempted murder if we can prove intent. How long would prison be? I kept my voice flat. 5 years? 7? Then he's out. He's young. He rebuilds his life. Probably 6 to 8 years for reckless endangerment with aggravating factors. No, I interrupted him. I want something permanent. I want him to live with what he did every single day. I want to create an irrevocable trust. Every asset I own goes to charity when I die. He gets nothing. Ever. Robert set down his pen carefully. An irrevocable trust is exactly that. Irrevocable. Once established, you can't change the beneficiaries. Even if you reconcile with James later. Even if circumstances change. You'd be permanently disinheriting your only child. Good. I met his eyes without hesitation. That's exactly what I want. How soon can you draft it? He studied me for a long moment. Lawyer's assessment searching for doubt or instability. He found neither. I can start tomorrow. But DeWitt, what exactly do you have in mind? I leaned forward, pulling a small notebook from my pocket. I'd bought it between the police station and here, and began explaining. 2 parts to this, I said, opening the notebook to show calculations I'd already started. First, the trust. Every asset, my business, my savings, my house, everything goes into an irrevocable trust. Beneficiaries are Alaska Charities, environmental groups, wildlife conservation, wilderness preservation. The same wilderness he tried to weaponize against me. Robert was taking notes, his legal training overriding his shock. Total asset value? Business appraised around $400,000, savings $850,000, house equity roughly $150. Call it $1.4 million. Numbers I knew precisely. Accountant's habit. Substantial corpus. And the second part? I want him to know. While I'm alive, I want to see his face when he realizes what he lost. I tapped the notebook. I'm planning a dinner. Witnesses present. You as legal authority. Officer Anderson from the police as law enforcement. Thomas Miller, who rescued me, as third-party verification. I present the note publicly, explain what happened, and announce the trust. He confronts the consequences before credible people. No room for denial. Robert frowned. I understand the appeal, but confronting him publicly is risky. He could become violent, could claim you're mentally unfit, could create legal complications. Are you certain this dinner approach is wise? He left me to die and went home to wait for inheritance news. He needs to understand he failed. Completely. The next morning, Robert started drafting. I spent the day gathering documentation, corporate papers for Gibson and Associates, bank statements, property deeds, decades of organized records filed in my home office. Everything I'd accumulated across 30 years of careful financial management, now being consolidated for one purpose. The business valuation took a week. A professional appraiser visited my office, reviewed client lists, examined revenue streams, interviewed me about succession planning. The irony wasn't lost on me, discussing succession while actively ensuring my son wouldn't succeed to anything. Your firm has excellent reputation, the appraiser noted. Clean books, loyal client base, that stability adds significant value. I've worked hard for that stability, I said. The appraisal came back at $385,000. Combined with savings and property, Robert's calculations confirmed approximately $1.4 million total. That's substantial generational wealth James is losing, Robert said when we reviewed the numbers. He made his choice in Denali. I'm making mine now. Evenings I researched beneficiaries. Alaska Wildlife Conservation Fund, protecting habitat, managing populations, educating about coexistence. Denali Wilderness Preservation Society, maintaining trails, supporting park rangers, fighting development encroachment. Organizations that represented everything James had tried to corrupt into a murder weapon. These charities will benefit from his greed, I explained to Robert. The wilderness he weaponized will be protected by the money he wanted. There's justice in that symmetry. 2 weeks after my return, early August now, 3 weeks since the abandonment, Robert called me back to his office. The conference room had been rearranged formally. A notary public sat at one end of the table. The trust document lay between us, 78 pages of legal language that would govern my estate forever. I sat down. Robert walked me through key sections. Lawyer's thoroughness ensuring informed consent. Page 12 establishes the irrevocable nature. Page 23 designates beneficiaries. Page 47 specifies you retain life estate. You can use assets during your lifetime, but ownership transfers to the trust. Upon your death, everything goes to the charities. No provisions exist for James Gibson. No possibility of future modification. I understand. This is permanent, DeWitt. Absolute. Final. That's the point. The notary spoke with practiced formality. Mr. Gibson, do you understand this is an irrevocable trust? Once executed, you cannot change the beneficiaries, modify the terms, or reclaim the assets except as specified in the trust document. Do you execute this voluntarily? I do. My voice was steady, clear, completely voluntarily. I initialed each page, 78 pages of careful notation, accountant's precision applied to legal documents. Then the signature pages, my name written 3 times, witnessed, notarized, sealed. The notary stamped the final page. The sound felt definitive, permanent. Robert collected the documents, placing them in a leather folder. It's done. The trust is executed and irrevocable. I'll file copies with the bank tomorrow. Notify the trustees. Begin the formal transfer process. I sat back in my chair, feeling something settle inside me. Not satisfaction exactly. More like grim completion. A necessary task finished. Thank you, Robert. The dinner confrontation, you're still planning that? Yes. 2 weeks from now. Enough time to arrange it properly. I'll contact the witnesses, set the location, send James an invitation he can't refuse. I stood, straightening my shirt. He thinks I'm dead. Time to prove otherwise. Robert walked me to the elevator. DeWitt, I have to ask. Are you sure about this? The trust accomplishes your goal. You don't need the confrontation. Yes, I said simply. I do. The elevator doors closed. I held the folder containing copies of the trust documents, 78 pages that made James's betrayal permanent in law. He wanted my money. Instead, he'd lost everything, and he didn't even know it yet. The day after signing the trust, I began executing the transfers. Alaska Bank and Trust's vice president met me in a private office, walking me through authorization forms that moved $850,000 from personal accounts into trust accounts. Each signature felt definitive. Each transaction removed another piece of James's expected inheritance. This is a substantial transfer, Mr. Gibson. The banker looked up from her computer screen. The trust is now one of our larger estate accounts. Good, I said simply. Business retitling took longer. Corporate documents filed with Alaska's Department of Commerce, amended articles showing trust ownership while I maintained operational control as trustee. Updated licenses, tax registrations. I sent formal letters to longtime clients explaining the ownership structure change, maintaining professional appearance while knowing the real purpose. By August 10th, I legally owned nothing. The house, the business, every dollar, all trust property. I retained lifetime use rights, but nothing to bequeath. James's inheritance had been erased. The phone rang on the 8th, evening after I'd returned from the last bank visit. James's name on the caller ID made my jaw tighten. Hey, Dad! His voice carried forced brightness that set my teeth on edge. I've been thinking about you. That camping trip was great, wasn't it? You made it home okay? I tried calling a few days ago, but no answer. Everything good? The artificial cheer barely masked nervous guilt underneath. Yes. One word, flat and cold. I'm home. Oh, good, that's... Good. Confusion crept into his voice. We should get together soon. Yes, we should. I hung up mid-sentence, sat at my kitchen table staring at the phone, imagining his expression on the other end, the uncertainty, the growing anxiety. He called again 4 days later. August 12th, afternoon. Dad, it's me again. Look, you sounded strange last time we talked. Is something wrong? Did something happen on the trip? I'm worried about you. Nothing's wrong, James. I kept my voice controlled ice. We'll talk soon about several things. What things? Dad, you're worrying me now. Soon. I hung up before he could respond. Let him wonder. Let him worry. The next evening, August 13th, I made the call I'd been planning. Stood in my home office looking at the family photograph on the wall. That camping trip when James was 16. Both of us smiling at Sarah behind the camera. Before money corrupted everything. James, I want you and Jennifer to come to dinner Thursday evening, August 15th, 7 o'clock. We need to have a serious conversation about family matters, financial arrangements, the future. His eagerness came through immediately. Of course, Dad, of course. We'll be there. This is good. I'm glad you're ready to talk about this stuff. Will it just be the three of us? He thought I was surrendering, thought the wilderness had broken me, taught me his lesson about priorities. Thought I'd invite him over to hand him money. No, I let the word hang. There will be others present, people who should hear what I have to say. Others? What do you mean? Who? Thursday, 7 o'clock. Don't be late. I hung up, allowing myself a cold smile. I called Robert next. The dinner's set for Thursday. You'll be there? I'll be there. A pause. You're certain about this approach? Public confrontation is irreversible. You can't take it back once done. That's the point, Robert. He tried to make my death irreversible. I'm making his consequences irreversible. I want you there to confirm the trust's legitimacy. He needs to hear from a lawyer that it's permanent." Officer Anderson agreed when I called. Thomas Miller said he'd be honored to attend. Thursday arrived. August 14th evening, I stood in my dining room arranging chairs, 6 places around the table. 3 on one side for family, though I no longer considered James family. 3 on the other for witnesses. I set out plates and silverware with accountant's precision, placed the manila folder at my seat, James's note, the police report, trust documents arranged in order. The stage was prepared. Tomorrow night, James would walk into this room expecting victory. Instead, he'd discover what losing everything really meant. 6:45. I did one final check. Documents arranged on the side table. Robert, Officer Anderson, and Thomas stood in my living room, understanding their roles as witnesses to justice. "He'll arrive thinking I've surrendered," I told them quietly, "that I'm giving him money. Let him keep thinking that until I'm ready." At 7:05, headlights swept across my front window. A car door slammed. Footsteps on the walkway. I opened the door before James could knock. "James, Jennifer, come in. I want you to meet some friends." James entered confidently, Jennifer close behind, both dressed well for what they expected would be pleasant family dinner. Their steps faltered when they saw 3 men standing in my living room. "Friends," James's forced smile didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, I thought this was family dinner." "It is." I walked toward the dining room. "These are the people I consider family now. Robert Palmer, my attorney. Officer Craig Anderson, Anchorage Police. Thomas Miller, who saved my life when you left me to die." James's face drained of color. Jennifer clutched his arm, confused. I gestured to the dining room. "Shall we sit?" The seating was deliberate. James and Jennifer on one side, the 3 witnesses facing them, me at the head of the table between them. I retrieved the manila folder, opened it methodically, removed James's note, unfolded it, smoothed it flat on the table where everyone could see. "Your words, James." My voice stayed steady, accountant's tone presenting facts. "Dad, you always said the taiga teaches survival. Time to remember those lessons. Maybe then you'll understand what's more important, money or family. If you return, we'll talk differently." I looked up, met his eyes. "If I return. You acknowledged I might not survive. You left me 50 miles from the nearest road with no navigation, no communication, minimal food and water, in wilderness where nighttime temperatures drop to 40 degrees. Dad, it wasn't... You're making it sound worse than it was?" James's voice shook. "It was supposed to be a lesson. Character building, like you always talked about. I knew you'd make it out. You're experienced. I left you enough supplies. You left me enough to watch myself die slowly." The words came out ice cold. "You took my GPS, my satellite phone, my map, my fire starter, everything that meant survival. You wanted me dead." Jennifer's hand covered her mouth, horror dawning on her face as she looked at James. She hadn't known. Not the full extent. I produced the trust documents, slid them across the table. "Here's what I learned about what's important, James. This is a notarized, irrevocable trust document. Every asset I own, my business valued at $385,000, my savings of $850,000, my house worth $180,000, total corpus $1.4 million, is now permanently held in trust." I watched his face as understanding began to penetrate. Beneficiaries: Alaska Wildlife Conservation Fund and Denali Wilderness Preservation Society. Upon my death, these organizations receive everything. You receive nothing. Ever. "You can't..." James started to stand, hands gripping the table. "I can verify," Robert interjected professionally. "This trust cannot be modified, revoked, or challenged. It's legally permanent." James sank back into his chair. His hands were shaking. Jennifer had started crying. I stood, pushing back from the table. "You asked me what's more important, money or family. I've learned the answer. The wilderness you tried to make my grave will benefit from your greed. The money you tried to inherit through my death will protect the place you weaponized." I walked to the front door, opened it. And the family I thought I had. That was an illusion. I have no son. I have no family. But I do have friends. People who helped me survive what you did. People who witnessed justice tonight. I stood beside the open door. Now leave my house. James and Jennifer rose like automatons. He looked shattered, face pale, movements mechanical. She supported him physically, though her expression suggested she was mentally distancing herself from the man she'd married. They walked out into the night. I closed the door firmly, locked it. When I returned to the dining room, Anderson spoke first. Mr. Gibson, with this evidence and these witnesses, we could pursue charges. Reckless endangerment, under Alaska statute. 1141:30, possibly attempted murder. I shook my head. Prison would be temporary. 5 years, 7, then he's out and rebuilds. This is permanent. Every day for the rest of his life, he'll know he tried to kill his father for money and lost everything instead. That's worse than any prison sentence. Thomas raised his coffee cup in a quiet toast. To survival and justice. Robert and Anderson joined him. So did I. Not triumph, not celebration, just cold recognition that justice had been served. James had tried to write my ending. Instead, I'd written his. The wilderness hadn't killed me. His greed had killed any possibility of redemption. I sat with the 3 men who'd helped me survive and watched as evening deepened into night, feeling nothing but the quiet satisfaction of consequences finally meeting actions. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.